What's up, champs? Welcome back to Short Shifts, the twice weekly podcast in between the enormous Sunday mega shows from Brian and Elon to keep you up to date with all of the latest and greatest news in the fantasy hockey world. I'm your host, Louis Ezekiel, ready to talk all the latest info, and joining me tonight for the first time on Short Shifts, we have Jeremy Versillo, Tier 1 manager in the Cupful and longtime patron of the podcast. How you doing today?
Doing great. Unfortunately, I'm a former Tier 1 manager, but I'm hoping to get back there this year, facing some stiff tests in Tier 2 Ottawa.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, Tier 1 is eternal. Once you have that designation, you don't ever lose it. That's what I'm telling myself as I am careening towards relegation here this season. My all-in bet on Austin Matthews is not paid in the way that I sort of hoped it would. So, maybe we'll be head-to-head in the near future. But if you face, get your way up to Tier 1, maybe I'll be hoping to join you up there soon.
Looking forward to it.
All right. I know you wanted to just mention a little bit about Connor Bedard's performance at the World Junior Championships before we jump into the more current topics here.
Absolutely. I've been watching a lot of the World Juniors because I like prospects and younger players, and Bedard's doing things that have never been done before. He's already set Canada's all-time points record, like for playing in a tournament as many times as you're eligible. He's set the all-time goals record, and he's also set Canada's single tournament points record, and still has 2 games left. He's got 21 points in, 5 games so far? And that's compared to last 2 points leaders in the tournament were Zegras and McTavish with 18 and 17 points in the whole tournament.
Wow, that's awesome. You love to see, these records are made to be broken, right? So you love when you see the next kind of generation step up and really take these things on. I got to ask, we've got Zegras now, and we've seen kind of what he's capable of, and certainly McTavish has a ton of potential. Do you think that he is going to be able to, make that transition up into the NHL? Do you think that he's going to be someone that people are going to be grabbing in, the first 5 rounds? Is that too generous? Is that too stingy of 1-year drafts? Like, what do people, I suppose it all sort of maybe depends on where he's going to land, but how do you think people are going to view Bedard coming out next year, just in 1-year leagues? Obviously, keeper leagues are a whole different animal.
Honestly, I think there will be people who take the plunge on him in the 4th or 5th rounds next year. He's going to be all over the place. I remember the first year Kaprizov came over. He went everywhere from like the 4th round to the 10th round in leagues I was playing in. I think this could be very similar, where he'll get drafted everywhere, but there's always going to be that one person in your league who's willing to take the risk on the upside very early.
Yeah. I love to see promise, and I love the idea of potential, but yeah, I usually think I find myself as one of the people who, let someone else bet on that potential and goes with a more sure thing, although a sure thing is not even a sure thing. But, just interesting to think about sort of the psychology of how the next draft might go with such an exciting young player coming on up. But we've got to get into the real world of hockey, and we've seen some really interesting stuff. Sometimes on a Tuesday show, I feel like we haven't necessarily got enough distance from Sunday, but we have tons of news. So let's get right into it here. First thing we got to talk about is Jakub Vrana. Tell us a little bit about what happened, and we got to think about what's coming next for this guy.
Yeah, so Vrana just came out of the NHL Players Assistance Program. No news on what the issue was, but he went through his treatment and is ready to come back playing. He was on a conditioning stint in the AHL and now has been waived. We don't know yet whether or not someone will pick up his $5.25 million contract for the next 2 years, but you have to imagine that a player like that available for free may generate some interest across the league.
Yeah, really interesting. Obviously there's a lot we don't know about the situation, up to and including his reason for entering the program in the first place. You pointed out while we were chatting earlier that Detroit's left wing situation is certainly getting crowded. We've got Robbie Fabry looking to return as early as this week. Tyler Bertuzzi making a comeback. You mentioned too that Kubalik has, outside of that 1-2 goal game, just been an absolute snoozer. And I think that came up on the mega show on Sunday as well. So a lot going on here with the Red Wings. My guess is that the combination of uncertainty regarding the reason for this waiver, along with the, like you said, a $5.25 million contract might allow him to clear. Maybe that's what Yzerman is counting on. I'm sure that I'm hoping certainly, that the club will be upfront about, their explanation for what's going on. But I wonder too, if it's maybe something that is information for Vrana to share, if anyone is going to share it. This is a very tricky one. I know we're all going to be kind of waiting with bated breath to see what goes on. He, is that player that minute for minute has always really, stunned with his offensive production, but he's never really been able to hold a spot in, on top lines or even in top sixes. He seems to often be in the doghouse with the coaches. I hope that his experience in the program maybe has helped him get his head on straight, and maybe he's just looking for a fresh start. But we've seen him in a couple stops now where he just has, like we talked about earlier, that great potential, but hasn't necessarily been able to capitalize it. So yeah, very interesting to see if a team is willing, to take on the contract and see if Vrana is able to, produce the way that he can, as a small minutes heavyweight. But yeah, so that's something definitely to keep an eye on. And hopefully, by Thursday, we'll be able to give a clarified picture, maybe including some reasoning behind some of this stuff. Jumping over to another pretty important story. We saw Tristan Jarry, leave the Winter Classic with injury. Casey DeSmith took over and played admirably, though he was not able to, secure the win. What do we think about DeSmith as an option here?
I really like DeSmith as a short-term option. If Jarry misses any significant amount of time, he's going to be backing up a pretty strong Pens team that knows how to play responsible hockey. So I think he's just as good as a lot of low-end starters in fantasy that people are probably holding. The real concern I have is the number of games he's going to play over the next 2 weeks, because he's only got 2 more left this week, and then there's a back-to-back as part of their slate next week. So he's probably only getting you 4 games over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, so definitely not maybe the kind of volume you were hoping to see, at least here kind of in the near term. We did see the Penguins call up a backup goalie, so it does appear that Jarry is going to be out at least in the near term here. I guess I'm going to be a little bit of the Brian here and throw some cold water on it. I'm not as excited about Jarry, or DeSmith, I should say. Just like you pointed out with the volume, I don't love it. It's not a ton of game options. I think, if Jarry is really going to be out, DeSmith is probably going to line up for, every start that he can. I doubt he'll start the 2 games of the back-to-back, and even if he does, that always makes me a little gun shy. But he's only had 1 quality start in his last 5 games, and that was back on December 10th versus Buffalo, and it was an excellent game. None of the starts have been spectacularly bad, at least, so you like to see that. But, with limited volume and not a ton of quality lately, I feel like I would rather maybe pass on DeSmith and use that slot, hopefully more efficiently, just because unless goalie streaming is really tough in that league, I feel like you're going to have better matchups arise, get a backup goalie who's playing well or something. It just makes me, yes, he's a starter, but he's not really getting that starter volume while Jarry is out. So I'm a little more hesitant, but I see where you're coming from, certainly. Like that Pens team, certainly they are capable. They got to get there. They got to get that top line going again. Crosby and Gensel really, on quite a bit of a cold streak, and of course dragging Russ down along for the way as well. All right, let's look at St. Louis now. We saw Vladimir Tarasenko announce that he has a hand injury. Ryan O'Reilly with a broken foot. They were given re-evaluation dates of 4 weeks for Tarasenko and 6 weeks for O'Reilly. It worries me the way they phrase that, just because, those are not healing opportunities like when we think they're going to come back. That's when we will take another look. The best I could find said to expect both back before the March 3rd trade deadline, but nothing more specific. Obviously, we certainly hope it'll be sooner than that. That would be a full 8 weeks, for both of them. But yeah, certainly some concern there for the Blues. Barbashev has been cold, but he is on the top power play, and might be worth an ad. It really is more like a true top power play than we've seen in St. Louis, leply, just because they've been more balanced, and now they don't really have that luxury. So I think Berube will kind of lean on that top power play a little bit more. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then Barbashev ended up lining up with Saad and Shen, so a pretty decent spot for him. Overall, I think it could potentially be a benefit for the top power play guys, just with more ice time, more opportunity. I am a little worried about it for the Blues goaltenders. It's already showing up a little bit, not that Samsonov, who we'll talk about a little bit later, has been doing great either. But I believe it's 5-5 right now in the third period. So neither goalie really covering themselves in glory. Anything that you want to bring up with regards to the Blues and their injury situation?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's some opportunity for some of their other offensive guys, because St. Louis is one of those teams that spreads the love a lot. But other than that, I think you just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, definitely. All right. We've got, let's see, one more spot we want to stop before we take a little break here. And that's to talk about the Washington Capitals, with some outjuries upcoming, but also some concerning injury news for some really important players. We heard that Oshie was a game time decision for Tuesday, and he did end up in the lineup. That Backstrom and Wilson are close to making a return, but we did get some bad news with regard to John Carlson, who is looking at a recovery time of months, not weeks. So I don't know. What are we looking at here with the Caps? In your opinion, fantasy wise, who should we be keeping an eye on, and what should we be considering for, how these injuries and outjuries are going to affect things moving forward?
Well, obviously, I think you need to keep an eye on those three forwards who are about to return: Backstrom, Oshie, and Wilson, because they're going to play in the top six. At least one of them is going to get power play time. I'm not sure if all of them will be fantasy relevant, especially with the breakout of some guys like Connor Sheary and Dylan Strome recently. But you got to be ready for them to be good contributors.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the power play splits right now on Frozen Pool, and it does look like TJ Oshie knocked Marcus Johansson out of his power play spot that he had enjoyed for a little while. So that top power play is Oshie, Kuznetsov, Strome, and Ovechkin. And with Eric Gustafsson, of course, manning the blue line there. He has been absolutely a waiver MVP here. And then you mentioned also with Dmitry Orlov as a banger leave option. He's seen that time on ice increase, and that's given him a nice increase on some of those rate stats, averaging 2 shots, 2 hits, and a block and a half each game. So if those are categories that matter to you, or you collect points on those, he could be a good option there. So we wanted to sort of talk about the elephant in the room here, and that is, what do we do about John Carlson? If you are full up on IR slots, especially if you have one of these other recent injuries, your Jarrys or your Tarasenkos or whoever, what do we do with that slot? I don't know. What is it? Is it wild to think that you might consider dropping Carlson with this news that we're a long way off from injuries?
I think you'd have to be pretty desperate to straight up drop Carlson. You made the point that you can probably trade him for some lesser player to a team that's secure in their playoff chances in fantasy. But if worse comes to worse and your league doesn't like trading, you may have to let go, because there's no guarantee he's back for the rest of the regular season, even.
Yeah, that's the big concern, right? Is if we're in a 1-year league, I think, don't rush. We can find out more information. I know months, not weeks, is necessarily the greatest news you've ever heard, but I'm sure it'll get more specific as time goes on. But yeah, I asked the question as a devil's advocate. I think it is wild to consider dropping him, for nothing. I think that, maybe the thing to do is, if you, are in need of immediate solutions, start shopping him to those, managers in your league who already have, are sitting pretty, when it comes to a playoff position. They can afford to maybe take a short-term hit for the chance to have a high-end power play QB come playoff time. I know Gustafsson, what he's done has been excellent. It has kind of been out of the blue. I don't see the Caps promoting him over a healthy Carlson if they have the opportunity. So, my thinking is, see if you're hell bent on getting rid of him, getting him off your roster, getting that dead weight off, shop around and see if you can't get somebody, rosterable plus, for your Karlsson, just because, dropping him for nothing. I don't see any reason why you would necessarily want to do that. Overall, just looks good for the Caps getting healthy. I think it should help their goalies generally. Looks like it'll mostly be Kemper who will be enjoying the benefit. Charlie Lindgren had a really nice run, just like he did last year with the Blues, but clearly appears to be goalie number 2 despite his stellar play. I see him as a nice stream option. I'm only bringing this up because he's rostered across 45% of Yahoo leagues, and I think that number is too high. I think that's a guy that you stream in when he has the opportunity because he's been playing very nicely, but I don't see him as a person who needs to be, kind of permanently sitting on your roster and filling that slot up.
Yeah, totally agreed there.
All right, Jeremy. Well, we're going to take a short little break here. When we get back, we're going to talk about some defensemen nearing a return to help you out on your back end. We've got some hot and cold streaks as well. You're listening to Short Shifts. Welcome back to Short Shifts. Jeremy, let's keep rolling right along. You had a nice list of some defensemen who are coming back who could help you with your depth. Why don't you run through them for us?
So especially with the injury to Karlsson that we talked about before the break, a lot of teams are in need of some help on defense now. A few guys who are nearing return from injury would be Nick Blankenburg in Columbus. He has some interesting banger upside, and with all the other injuries Columbus has, he should get big minutes. I think he's one of those players that if Marcus Bjork is owned in your league, then Nick Blankenburg definitely should be when he's healthy. The second one is Mike Matheson in Montreal. He's going to be reevaluated after the road trip, which ends tonight. When he comes back, he'll be top line and top power play. He was playing 23, 24 minutes a night before then. I think he's probably the best of the bunch. He's got a lot of upside, even on a bad team. Last but not least, for those of you in a much deeper league, Scott Perunovich, who has not played many NHL games. He's one of the St. Louis Blues' top prospects coming back from a shoulder injury. But with the void left by Torrey Krug, I could see Perunovich jumping into a power play 1 role potentially. He's got that kind of skill set. And when he comes back, I'm sure he'll be on the roster at least.
Yeah, excellent. Perunovich was an interesting guy that we spent some time talking about last season, if you've been listening to the pod. I think that's an interesting spot. I would say, my guess would be Falk would continue to hold on to that power play 1, but Perunovich maybe could be a power play 2 option. Obviously, it'll all come out in the wash, right? We'll be able to see how it really goes once he's back, but obviously that top power play spot has a little more of a premium on it right now, with the injuries in St. Louis, because the second unit is not what it has been, with that more balanced look. I agree with you. I think Matheson, is the top pick there, just because he has had that power play 1. And obviously, when you're out there with your Caulfields, and your Suzuki's, that's when, the team is doing its best. So, anytime you can, just the same way that you're going to grab their line mates, you want to grab folks who are going to play in their unit. So I'm with you, Matheson, top overall. I think Blankenburg would be my second, because, we've seen him, have some nice production here this year. Like Perunovich, not a very long NHL resume to his name. But, definitely someone that the Blue Jackets are going to rely on. We want to see kind of where he ends up in the power play pecking order. All right, let's get on to some hot and cold streaks here. I think with the injury returns, one of my hot streaks is already kind of obsolete, so we'll skip over Marcus Johansson, who had 6 points in the last 6 games. But appears to be pretty much fully removed from the power play situation. But you mentioned him earlier, Connor Sheary. I really like as an option. He's only 22% rostered in Yahoo. He, at the time that I was preparing, had 1 goal, 6 assists in his last 4 games. Let's turn that to 1 goal, 7 assists in the last 5, because he does have an assist here on Tuesday evening. He's playing his even strength primarily with Strome and Ovi. That's definitely the line that you'd like to be on. He's not getting that power play exposure, at least on the top unit, but if you are on any power play in Washington, you get to play with Ovi. So, I like to have that opportunity available as well. He's been on a nice little streak. Obviously, those assists are not helping you out as much as goals, but I like Sheary. He was an interesting option during portions of his Penguins career. He was interesting last year at times as well on the Caps, and it seems like he is on a nice little roll for himself as well. So a good option to add. 2 more games against the Blue Jackets here this fantasy week. And that's usually a pretty decent opportunity to put up some points. Let's jump over to a couple cold goalies. Do you want to start us off with the first one?
Yeah, Alexander Georgiev on Colorado has 4 straight games of under a 900 save percentage, including a pair of really bad starts against Toronto and Arizona, of all teams. I don't think there's much going on here. I mean, he's having a rough stretch. Colorado has had a bunch of injuries lately. But also, Pavel Francouz is hurt too, so they're not going to play Jonas Johansson over Georgiev.
Yeah, especially as we all recall, he was described as one of the worst goalies the beat writer had ever seen out in Buffalo, I believe, when he came over. So, yeah, I imagine that, Georgiev, he's in that pile with some of these other upper tier players who are on cold streaks, Ekblad, Crosby, Guentzel, Kopitar, JT Miller. There's not a whole lot to do with these guys just because, the hang in there option is usually better and less regrettable than the drop for nothing or trade for pennies on the dollar option. So he's one of those guys where, he's on a cold streak. But he's still, an average plus goalie on a good team. So he's worth having around, I think, in most cases, and hopefully he'll get it back together. He did have, 4 straight games where he allowed 4 total goals. So he's definitely capable. It's just been kind of rough lately. And Arizona's been doing this to teams lately. But here's a more actionable cold streak for another goalie, and that is Ilya Samsonov. He's had 3 really bad starts in his last 4 games. That would be starts under an 850 save percentage. He's still hanging in there on Tuesday night and may even get the win. I think that game was moved into overtime. But he has allowed 17 goals in these 4 games, plus overtime right now. So we might add 1 more just for fun. It really seems like that crease does belong to Matt Murray, who has 3 quality starts and 1 really bad start in his last 4, at least until we see Murray's next injury setback. Not that I'm wishing it for him. Obviously, I want him to do great. I have, I like Matt Murray and I hope he does well, but it does seem to be a pattern. When that happens, Samsonov would certainly be an interesting option, even though he's struggling lately. And then the last team that we want to talk about here is Philadelphia, who's got a few players who are pretty interesting and not widely owned. I'll start with a guy that I'm pretty interested in, and that is none other than Scotty Tulati. That is Scott Laughton, 16% owned. 3 goals, 3 assists for 6 points over his last 4 games, averaging over 2 shots a game, playing with Hayes and Allison at even strength and playing on power play 2. That's not necessarily the most appealing deployment, certainly, but he really does seem to be making the most of it. And he's been on quite a hot run. One other thing that he's doing for your team is in the time that he's spent killing penalties, he, I believe, has had 3 shorthanded points in the recent past. I think he's got 5 total on the season. So if you are in a league where shorthanded points count or, heaven forbid, are a category where just getting 1 or 2 can win that cat for you for the week, definitely take a look at Scott Laughton. Noah Cates also is an option out there at 1% owned, a goal and 4 assists for 5 points in the last 4 games. Definitely a more enviable spot at even strength with Konechny and Farabee at even strength, also on power play 2. I still would take, I think, Laughton over Cates just because, for one, Laughton's been more productive and, he's got a longer track record too. Cates is kind of like a third wheel who I could see getting shifted over. And then you wanted to bring up a good Michigan man for us here to cap things off.
Yeah, as much as I'm not a Michigan man myself, I do love many of the Michigan players in the NHL, one of whom is Cam York. Cam York got the call-up recently, and although he has not gotten a slot on Power Play 1, he's playing some decent minutes, getting some points, and averaging, I think, like a block and a half a game through his short stint in the NHL. I think he may be here to stay this time. I think he's looked good and passed the eye test, which is what the coach over there cares most about. And yeah, Cam York, if you need some help on defense, especially short term, one thing with these Flyers is the Flyers have the rare 5-game week coming up in a couple weeks. So if you can grab one while they're hot, you'll be rewarded in a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you can hold them on your roster, some advantageous scheduling even as early as next week with a Monday, Wednesday game. So yeah, I would definitely be looking to, I love the idea of making some of these plans with an eye on the future. Not just are they going to help you in short term, but if they're worth holding, might be someone that you want to grab, and hold, just to get some of that nice volume. So I really like that too. I did want to mention, I was talking about these 4-game streaks for Laughton and Cates. Those last 4 games have included Los Angeles, Anaheim, and San Jose, all of them which were on the road. So that has got to count for something, but they're not up against the best defenses in the world. But yeah, it's been some nice streaks for them, and I think they're definitely worth taking a look at. All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been great having you. I believe you'll be back at least for Thursday as well, filling in for the inimitable Ben Burnett, but it's been nice having your voice on here and your insights. Anything you want to share with the folks before we send them off?
No, nothing that I need to share. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast, and I'm happy to sub in anytime you guys need a pinch hitter.
Oh, absolutely. Our pleasure. Can't wait to talk to you on Thursday. If the beginning of this week is any indication, we are going to have a ton to discuss by the time Thursday rolls around. Thanks everybody who has joined us here. Please give us a follow at Short Shifts KK. You can find Brian and Elon at Keeping Carlson. Dave Betton of the Stream Scheme is taking a hiatus here. You may still be able to catch him on Twitter at NHL Stream Scheme, but definitely want to tune in and see what is coming next for Davey B, because he is always entertaining and has great fantasy insights. Certainly recommend that you follow at Game Day Lines, at Game Day Goalies, and at Game Day News NHL, all of which is so nicely organized at GameDayTweets.com. Visit that site and the other great sites where we research our episodes at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach. John Reed is our digital media producer. And until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.